You're listening to the Radical Ideas Podcast. Episode 3, The Flash. We start off in Central City 20 years ago. William and Nadine West are over at their friends the Allens' house for dinner. Their children, Iris and Barry, are upstairs playing. William and Nadine ask Nora how Wally is doing, and she says that he's having trouble walking, but he's doing okay. A quick cut outside the house shows the silhouette of a man watching the two families. Back inside, Nora then asks how Rudy is doing, and the couple chuckle and say that Rudy actually just got engaged. William and Nadine head into the kitchen to grab something, and we see a young Barry Allen head downstairs to ask his mother a question. But as he turns the corner heading down, there's a bright flash of yellow light, and in an instant, Nora Allen lay dead on the ground. Henry Allen, standing above her, with a knife in his hand, covered in his wife's blood. He and Barry scream in horror as they realize what has happened. Officer Lawrence Snart shows up at the scene and arrests Henry Allen for the murder of his wife. But as Lawrence drives Henry to the station, he says that he pities Henry, because he can understand why he did what he did. Henry Allen is booked and thrown in jail, and we follow Lawrence back home. He walks into the door, and we see that his house is a mess, and sitting down on the ground are two dirty children eating a meager meal. Lawrence asks them if they made anything for him, and the 8-year-old Lisa Snart brings her father her food. Lawrence shoves his daughter to the ground and insults her housekeeping skills. Her older brother Leonard stands up and tries to defend his sister, but Lawrence slaps his son to the ground and says, "Oh, look at the big man. You think you're tough, huh? Well, go on. Give me your best shot." Leonard charges at his father and is once again knocked to the ground. Leonard and Lisa hug each other and cry as their father takes both of their dinners for himself and leaves. 6 years later, we are outside the Snart family house, and we hear the words again. "Oh, look at the big man. You think you're so tough, huh? Well, go on. Give me your best." And the last word is cut off by a loud punch. And we cut back inside, and we see the now 16-year-old Leonard has knocked his father out cold. He turns to his younger sister and tells her to grab her skates. They're going. And they step over their father. They hop into their dad's car, and Leonard drives Lisa to her ice skating classes. They are both overjoyed that Leonard is now finally able to beat up their dad, and they are imagining what kind of life they will be able to live from now on. But once Lisa is dropped off to class, we see police cars swarm Leonard, and he is arrested. He is thrown in juvenile detention for assaulting a police officer. But while in prison, he meets his future best friend, Mick Rory. 4 years later, we see the now 18-year-old Lisa competing in a figure skating competition. We see Mick and Leonard cheering from the sidelines, but with the intensity as if they were watching a hockey game. Lisa finishes her routine and receives a nearly perfect score, and she wins the competition. She runs over to her brother and his best friend, and the three of them all embrace, cheering, the two men congratulating her. Lisa is still in disbelief that her brother was able to afford her entry fee, and he tells her not to worry about it. But then the judges announce that Lisa Snart has been disqualified. The three turn to the judges to see what is going on, and they see the Central City Police Department heading their way once again. Mick and Leonard are arrested. As it turns out, they had been robbing convenience stores to pay for Lisa's entry. A few weeks later, in Iron Heights Penitentiary, we see Lisa sitting down to speak to her brother. Eagle-eyed viewers will be able to see Henry Allen speaking to a young, blonde man just a few rows down. Lisa is chastising her brother. She is in utter disbelief that he would rob stores to pay for her dreams. Leonard is clearly heartbroken, and he begins to apologize to his sister, but she cuts him off with, "Robbing a bank would be so much smarter." Leonard is shocked at his sister's suggestion, and Lisa lets out a devilish grin, telling her brother that he and Mick better stay on their best behavior and leave everything else to her. 5 years later, a large explosion knocks out the windows of the Central City branch of the Wayne Credit Union. We see 3 masked figures run from the smoke as a car pulls up. They all hop into it and it peels off. We see the driver and a 5th masked man sitting in the passenger seat. We see CCPD squad cars get behind the getaway car and begin chasing them. One of the figures in the back removes their mask. It is the now 21-year-old Lisa Snart. She leans forward and taps the shoulder of the man sitting in the passenger seat and says, "Digger, do you got this?" The man in the passenger seat cackles, pulling out sharpened boomerangs, and in a thick Australian accent, he says, "Darling, I was born for this." He climbs partially out of the opened passenger window and sits on the edge. He yells out, "Keep it bloody steady, Martin!" And Mark Martin, the getaway driver, obliges. The car is steady, and we watch as Digger takes a deep breath and then hurls a razor-sharp boomerang. It swings around and pops the front tire of one of the pursuing police cruisers. He then hurls 2 more boomerangs and does the same to the final 2. The gang cheer as they peel off into the sunset. We get a montage of this crew committing more and more heists over the years in cities all across the United States, and we see that they earn a nickname, the Rogues. 3 years later, the Rogues are robbing an art museum, but as Lisa reaches out to grab a statue, her hand passes through it, and we see the rest of the Rogues encountering similar things. And Lisa finds a signed calling card informing the museum that they have just been robbed by the Mirror Master. We get another montage of more and more instances of the Rogues being beaten to a score by this so-called Mirror Master, until we begin following that masked figure. We see him hacking into a museum's security and disabling it. He takes a precious item off of a pedestal and places a small device in its stead. He activates the device, and suddenly a hologram replacement of the item is left there. But as he is leaving, he trips an alarm that he didn't notice. He runs out of the museum as the alarm blares, and out on the street we see him begin to panic as police sirens begin descending upon him. He has no way out of this. But then a van pulls up and swings a door open, and we see the Rogues. Lisa holds out her hand to the Mirror Master, and he takes it. Inside the van, Mirror Master removes his mask, and we see a handsome face of Evan McCullough. Lisa and him stare at each other and smile, and the Rogues make an escape with their newest member. 1 year later, the Rogues are all hanging out in their hideout, a warehouse very much with the vibes of the Fast and the Furious gang warehouses in the later movies. Digger is holding a batarang, talking to Mark, saying that he wouldn't believe how much this cost, but it is the real deal fresh from Gotham. Lisa and Evan then call the group in for a meeting, and we see that they are acting very close. Clearly, the two have gotten into a relationship in this last year. They tell the gang that they have a special announcement, and Evan pulls out a small egg-looking device, which begins to hover. Typing into a keypad on his wrist, we see as the device begins projecting a hologram. Leonard says, "No offense, but a floating hologram, while impressive, doesn't really seem like it warrants an all-team meeting." Lisa and Evan then smile, and Evan reaches out and grabs the hologram. The rogues freeze. Evan then tosses it through the air to Leonard, who catches it in his hands. And Evan explains that he has just perfected hard light technology. It is a combination of force fields projected in perfect synchronization with his highly detailed holograms, making tangible light. But it has one significant downside. And as we see the hologram being passed between the rogues, as it is tossed in the air to Digger, it dies, and Digger catches the egg-shaped projector. Lisa speaks up. It uses a lot of power. So these portable projectors are really not that feasible without an unreal power source. But Lisa lets out that telltale wicked grin. Leonard smiles to his sister and says, "So what do we get one of those?" And Lisa slams some blueprints down on the table. They are labeled Star Labs, Central City. And Lisa says, "Home sweet home." The screen cuts to black as an alarm clock begins to go off, and we see the 29-year-old Barry Allen wake up. Next to him in bed is his wife, Iris West Allen. He kisses her on the forehead and he hops out of bed. We see him head into the bathroom and turn on the shower. As it heats up, the pipes make strange noises, and Barry comments to himself that he's going to need to get that looked at. He begins brushing his teeth and climbs into the shower as he finishes brushing. Heading downstairs, he finds his nephew Wally eating cereal. Barry comments that Wally seems up early, and Wally confirms that he's having trouble sleeping again. Barry pops some toast into the toaster and puts on a pot of coffee. He then grabs a breakfast protein bar out of the pantry and begins eating it. Iris comes down the stairs shortly after and pours herself a fresh cup of coffee just as the toast dings. And we see that the toast that Barry put in the toaster was actually for her. She pulls it out and begins buttering it. Iris also comments on her nephew's early morning, and he confirms that it was his legs again. Iris says that they should really get him checked out for restless leg syndrome. And then, just as Barry finishes his breakfast bar and grabs a banana, his beeper goes off. He checks it and lets out a surprised whistle. Iris and Wally ask him what's up, and Barry says, "Star Labs was robbed last night. The captain wants me to head there as soon as I grab my stuff from the office." Iris says that she'll probably see him there later, and they kiss goodbye, and Wally and Barry high-five as he heads out of the house. Barry Allen is wearing a red hoodie that says the Central City Messengers on it, with the silhouette of Hermes racing across it. And Barry begins to run, albeit at normal human speed. Barry jogs down the street, and we see that he only lives about half a mile from work, and he runs there every morning. He heads inside, saying hello to his coworkers, and he heads into his lab and gears up for the crime scene. And then we cut to Star Labs. We see that the CCPD has taped everything off until CSI can arrive, and Barry Allen finally does. And he gets to work. Barry labels pieces of evidence, he takes photos of the scene, he recreates the method of robbery, and it just doesn't add up. Pulling security footage, they see that it was committed by one of the staffers. They walked right in, took all of the stolen items, and left. The problem is that that employee has a rock-solid alibi, complete with dozens of eyewitnesses and security footage. And so it appears they have some sort of doppelganger on their hands. Barry asks for a full inventory of what was stolen, and Star Labs confirms it was a handful of experimental tech scraps that are really mostly useless to anyone who doesn't know what they're doing. But the big thing they got away with was kryptonite. Barry is shocked, turning to them, and says, "Are we talking solidified krypton gas or Superman kryptonite?" And the Star Lab technician confirms the Superman kryptonite. Barry reports this to his higher-ups and finishes his investigation of the crime scene. He dusts for prints everywhere where the employee on the security footage touched with their hands. But he finds no fingerprints. He notes this on his investigation and then heads outside. And we see Iris West Allen reporting for Central City Picture News. She wraps up her report just as Barry heads outside. They meet up, and she asks if he has anything he can tell her yet, and Barry confirms nothing that they can release right now, but this is a weird one. They kiss goodbye, and Barry heads into the CCPD forensics lab with what he has. Barry runs tests all night, sequencing the DNA of the hair fibers they found on the scene, eliminating the employees who all had alibis. And he finds something weird. Some of the hair fibers found on scene belonged to Evan McCullough, a Scottish criminal wanted by Interpol. But he was nowhere in the footage. Outside the lab window, it is dark, and a lightning storm is cracking. Power to CCPD goes out while Barry is working, and he chooses that as the perfect time to head home for the day. He writes down his findings and begins to leave. But Krakoom! A red lightning bolt strikes through the window of the lab, hitting Barry in the chest and sending him flying into a cabinet full of chemicals. The vials cut into him, and acid pours down onto Barry's skin. Officers run in with flashlights just as the backup generators to the building turn on, and they see what happened to Barry. They call in paramedics, and Barry is rushed to an ambulance. And as the paramedics are working on him, noting the damage and burns to his skin, when they look away, Barry's body vibrates quickly, and the heart rate monitor flatlines. The paramedics turn back to Barry and note that some of the cuts that they thought he had before are gone now, and they chalk it up to it must have been loose blood from other cuts. And then Barry begins to shake again. The paramedics believe he is seizing as the heart rate monitor flatlines once again. But then it stops, and his vitals go back to normal, and the paramedics continue cleaning him up. And as they do, they find that even more of the wounds they had originally noted aren't there. They chalk it up to it must have been a mix of chemicals and blood that just looked like cuts, and finally they arrive at the hospital just as Barry Allen wakes up. The medics try to calm him down and explain what happened. Barry checks himself for damage and is confused, because he knows that the mix of chemicals that spilled onto him when he crashed into that cabinet should have left permanent, horrible scars. But he had none. Just a few cuts and scrapes, and the Lichtenberg figure left on his chest from where the lightning hit. Other than that, Barry seems entirely fine. Iris and Wally show up shortly after, and Iris hugs her husband and begins inspecting him for damage. The doctor on duty says that it is a miracle that Barry is okay. Right now, their going theory is that it's just the exact right mix of chemicals all spilled onto each other, neutralizing themselves on Barry's skin. However, Barry is a genius chemist and knows that nothing in that cabinet should have canceled out anything else. But he is tired, and he was just hit by lightning. So Barry would like to go home. The hospital leaves Barry with a pamphlet detailing what to expect after being struck by lightning, which Wally eagerly grabs and begins to read. The West Allen family all head back and get home very late. But we see Barry Allen toss and turn all night. Unable to sleep, he finally comes downstairs around 3 a.m., where he finds Wally West playing a video game. Wally says that he couldn't sleep either, and Wally is playing some sort of rhythm game, and we see that he has a perfect score. He has not missed a single beat. Barry compliments Wally's skill, and Wally asks if he wants to play. It usually helps him calm down and get sleepy. And so Barry agrees, and pulls out a second controller. We see that the name of the console they are playing is a Lexbox. Wally comments to his uncle that reaction times can be slowed after being hit by lightning, so don't worry if he misses a bunch. But as the course starts, we see that Barry is keeping up with Wally. They play through the entire round, and Wally is shocked. He asks Barry if he has been playing the game in secret, but Barry confirms that no, and he's usually terrible at rhythm games, but this one just seemed easy. Barry thanks Wally, saying that that really helped, and he heads back upstairs, reminding Wally to try and get some sleep. Wally confirms that he will, but after Barry leaves, Wally double-checks his game, and he sees that the settings are exactly where he'd left them. Maximum speed and maximum difficulty. And Wally West is just confused. The next morning, Barry's alarm goes off again. He turns it off and he gets out of bed. He heads into the bathroom and turns the shower on. But no water comes out. He turns the handle to the sink a few times and finds that no water comes out of it either. Barry sighs, damn it. Lightning must have taken out something and they're probably working on the water lines somewhere. So Barry grabs the water bottle from his bedside table and uses that to brush his teeth. He then heads downstairs and he finds Wally asleep on the couch, and he pops a slice of bread in the toaster for Iris's breakfast. He eats his protein bar and he eats his banana, and he notices that the toaster isn't popping. He presses the button, but the bread doesn't come out. And Barry runs upstairs, also noticing that Iris hasn't gotten out of bed yet. He kisses her on the forehead and lets her know that he's heading into work just to help with inventory to see everything that was lost in the lab last night, and that the toaster is on the fritz and the water is out. He kisses his wife and he heads to work. Barry runs along his usual route and eventually hits a stoplight, and he jogs in place as usual, waiting for it to change. But after a while, it still hasn't. Barry looks over into the street and he sees one of the cars also waiting for the light to change, and it is just someone leaning on their hand, looking at the light, waiting. Barry waits a little bit longer and decides he's gonna jaywalk. And as he runs across the street, the camera pans up and we see a bird suspended in midair. Barry pops into the CCPD saying hi to everyone as he walks in, not noticing that everyone standing still is standing eerily still. Barry walks to his lab and he finds the window smashed, the lab in a mess and taped off. And so Barry gets to work. He cleans the lab up, he sweeps up the glass, he neutralizes the chemicals that were spilled everywhere, he gets everything all organized, and he tries to turn on his computer, but nothing happens. He thinks it must be because of the storm last night, and that power must not be fully back on everywhere yet, or maybe there's a blown fuse. So instead, he grabs a pen and a notepad, and we watch Barry take detailed inventory on everything they will need to replace. He even goes so far as to measure the windows for the size that will need replacing. And finally, he finishes getting all of the expensive gear out of the way of the broken window until it can be replaced. And his lab is back in proper working order. Barry thinks that is about the perfect time for him to take lunch, and he finally checks his watch, only to be shocked because it still says 8 a.m. He looks up at the clock on the wall and sees that it also says 8 a.m. He heads out to talk to a coworker, and he finally notices that none of them are moving at all. Barry begins to panic, and he runs outside. He sees everyone completely frozen. He runs back home, passing the same car with the same person waiting on the same light. And then Barry looks up and notices the bird from before frozen in the air. Barry's panic kicks up a notch and he sprints home, throwing open the door and racing upstairs to Iris. But the second he touches her, there is a loud boom. A gust of wind rushes throughout the entire house, knocking a blanket off of Wally downstairs, knocking things off of shelves, and booming into the bedroom. Iris wakes up terrified, wondering what is happening, and finds her husband on the verge of tears. Barry has no idea what is going on, and as he is trying to vent to his wife, we hear his bed alarm still going off, and the shower running in the background. Iris gets Barry to calm down, and then she turns off the alarm. Barry explains everything to her, and she tells him that that just sounds like a horrible nightmare. Barry looks around his room and agrees with his wife. He must have been partially asleep. Maybe this is something from the lightning strike and it's just messing with his head. Iris checks with her husband to make sure that he really is okay to go back into work today. And Barry says, "I'll just be doing inventory to see what was lost in the lab. I should be okay." Barry heads into the bathroom and finds the water running. He grabs his toothbrush and brushes his teeth again, and showers. He heads downstairs, and Wally asks what the wind was. Barry asks what Wally means, and Wally says that when he woke up, wind had pulled the blanket off of him and knocked some things down. Barry looks at the door in suspicion just as Iris comes downstairs to eat her breakfast. Barry finishes his morning routine with his family and then runs to work again, with everything operating like normal. But when he heads upstairs and gets to his lab, he drops his bag. The lab is immaculate, exactly the way he'd left it in his dream. And sitting on the middle of the laboratory counter is Barry's notepad with all of the notes he'd written that morning. Barry picks it up, and as his hand begins to shake, he drops it in fear. But as it falls, it begins to fall in slow motion, and eventually stops before hitting the ground. Barry is shocked. He is panicking. But he is also curious. He leans over to examine the floating notepad, and as he does, he starts to calm down, and the notepad begins to speed up, before slap. It hits the ground. Barry is frozen, staring at it, just as one of his coworkers walks in and is shocked to find the lab cleaned already. They say, "Allen? Did you come in early to clean this? Dude, you got hit by lightning yesterday. Go home." Barry nods and confirms that that is definitely the right idea. He picks his notepad up off of the ground and walks into the captain's office. Barry lets the captain know that he is definitely going to need some medical leave as he is not feeling great after that. And the captain also confirms that, yeah, it was crazy that Barry even wanted to come in. He got struck by lightning last night. Barry nods and hands his captain the notepad, saying this is the inventory of everything that will need restocked. And down at the bottom, those are the measurements for the window replacements. And the captain just laughs and thanks Barry, saying, "Allen, I swear you are some type of superhuman getting this all done. Go home and rest, captain's orders." And just before he leaves, he lets the captain know that just before he was struck by lightning, he found evidence that the Scottish criminal Evan McCullough was on the scene of the Star Labs robbery. We cut back to the Rogues and see Mick and Leonard hanging out on a rooftop overlooking Central City. They clearly have mixed feelings about being back home. Mick is fidgeting with a lighter. Lisa opens the door to the rooftop where they're hanging and says they're ready. The crew all head down to their Central City safe house, and we see Mark Martin and Digger Harkness hard at work in full hazmat suits, carving down a glowing green chunk of kryptonite. They are taking small slivers of it and placing them into capsules. Evan then walks up to the table, grabs one of these capsules, and plugs it into one of his holo projectors. He then places it on a table next to dozens more. Leonard asks Evan to show him what he's got, and Evan smirks, tossing several projectors into the air. He taps on his wrist computer, and suddenly the holo projectors whir to life, and standing before the Rogues are holographic doppelgangers of themselves. But Evan's surprises don't end there, and he pulls out a set of fancy-looking boomerangs and hands them to Digger. Digger excitedly peels off his hazmat suit and runs up to Evan, grabbing them, and Evan explains that they are essentially lightsaber boomerangs. Digger powers them on, and we see the edges glow blue, and he hurls them into the air. One darts around the warehouse and cuts a loose steel beam clean in half before returning to Digger's hands. Evan explains that the gloves that you have to wear while using these boomerangs disables the laser blades when they are within 3 feet of the gloves. That way they can be caught safely. But, and he points to a button on the side of the boomerangs, if you press that, you can use them as melee weapons. Digger holds the boomerangs in his hands and presses the buttons with his thumbs, and the opposite side of the blade begins to glow blue. And Digger cackles with joy. Evan then turns to Lisa, his love, and he presents to her a pair of golden ice skates. She takes them in surprise, and he encourages her to put them on. She does, and then Evan gets her to try them out. She points out that there's no ice in here, but Evan says to try anyway. Lisa begins to skate, and she begins to glide with ease. Looking down, she sees a temporary golden trail left in her wake of the blades. And Evan says that the boots are projecting mini force fields so that she can skate on any surface, or none at all. He then grabs Lisa and launches her into the air in a gorgeous spin where she floats. Lisa laughs happily and begins to perform an ice skating routine dancing through the air, as the rogues all cheer. Back with Barry Allen, he has brought Iris to their college track field. It is currently empty, and Iris is clearly worried about her husband. Barry reassures her that he needs her there to confirm whether or not he is crazy, so Iris acquiesces. Barry gets ready to sprint, and he takes off at totally normal human speeds. Iris claps and says, "Yeah, that seemed pretty fast." But Barry knows he can do better. We get a quick montage of Barry running and getting consistently the same speed. And while that wasn't unexpected, what is the fact that Barry, despite running all day, doesn't seem at all out of breath. Iris goes over to her husband and pats him on the back, asking if he got what he needed to out of his system. And Barry dejectedly says, "Yeah." Iris tells Barry that he must be hungry after all that running, so how about they grab some pizza on the way home? And as they walk off, Barry says that they should get 2, because he is really hungry. We cut to outside the pizzeria, and Barry and Iris are walking out with 2 very large pizzas. Iris is chuckling, saying that she cannot believe Barry bought that much. And Barry is saying, "I told you, I'm really hungry." But as they go to get into her car, a truck blares past Iris, almost hitting her. And Barry and Iris realize that this truck is out of control. Iris gasps in shock, knowing that there is nothing that they can do. But Barry drops the pizzas. And boom! In an instant, Barry is down the street with the old woman in his arms out of the way of the truck, just as it rushes past and crashes into a concrete barrier. The older woman stares in awe at Barry, and as he places her down, she reaches out to him. But Barry runs away before she can touch him. Barry is back with Iris in a flash, and Iris's jaw is on the floor. Her husband has super speed. Iris urges Barry to head back home, saying that she's going to call the network and she is going to get this story while it's hot. Barry nods to his wife and tilts his head. Iris looks at him knowingly and says, "No, I will not say it was you. Now go, get out of here." Barry grabs the pizzas and once again, in a flash, is gone. Iris is left in a look of disbelief, before she pulls out her phone and runs over to the woman, yelling out, "Ma'am! Iris West Allen with Picture News." A while later, Barry is back home with the pizzas. He and Wally are sitting down in front of the TV, eating it, as Iris texts them both, saying that they are going to want to watch her report. They flip to the news and watch the broadcast. We see Iris West Allen reporting for Picture News that a hero's legacy may very well be alive in Central City. Earlier this evening, a commercial shipping truck lost control after its air brakes suffered a catastrophic failure. The truck careened down Fox Street, headed towards the intersection of Lampert Avenue, where it would have hit a pedestrian, but it would seem that she has a guardian angel, and we see the CCTV footage of a red blur rushing the woman off the screen. Iris resumes, saying, "One very close to home," and Iris approaches the woman. We see the name Judith Green appear on the screen, and Iris says, "I'm standing here next to the woman who was saved, Judith Green, nay, Judith Garrick, daughter of the legendary Justice Society member and superhero Jay Garrick, the Flash. Judith, what do you have to say about this red blur who saved you?" And we see Judith's face light up. She says that when I was a little girl, my father used to take me running all the time. And after he passed, I was afraid that that was something I would never get to feel again. But the man who saved me tonight, that felt like when my father used to take me. It felt safe. Judith looks to the camera and says, "Young man, I don't know who you are, but I do know what you are. You are a hero, and you saved my life tonight. Thank you. Thank you." Back with Barry and Wally. Wally is fanboying hard, because Jay Garrick was Wally's favorite member of the Justice Society, and now there's a new speedster in town? Barry sits back thinking about what Joan said. And later that night, Iris returns home and meets up with Barry, because she is still in disbelief that her husband has super speed. Barry is shocked too, but at least glad to know that he is not crazy. The two of them laugh, and there's a beat of silence. Iris asks, "Are you thinking about what Judith said?" And Barry nods, saying that it felt good to help her. It felt really good. And Iris nods, saying that Barry became a CSI to help people, to try and bring justice for his father. Barry looks at his wife, pleading in his eyes, and Iris nods and hugs her husband, saying, "Be the hero you're meant to be, Barry." And Barry begins to cry tears of joy, and then he begins laughing and crying, saying, "Oh my God, I'm going to be a superhero." And Iris begins laughing too, saying, "I'm going to be married to a superhero, and I have to keep this secret? This is a huge story. You're like the third superhero in 30 years, and I can't even talk about it because of you." And she jokingly pokes her husband. The pair laugh and hug, collapsing in bed. And Iris looks to her husband and says, "So, training montage?" And sure enough, we get one. They return to their college track, and Iris times Barry once again. Only this time, she isn't even able to stop the watch before Barry has already completed a lap around the track. So they realize they need to up the distance. And she has Barry run to their neighbor city, Keystone, the home of Jake Garrick. Barry takes off and returns in a matter of seconds. Running the quick math, he realizes that he just ran 14,000 miles per hour. We then cut and see that the West Allen family have visited Keystone City, and specifically, the Jay Garrick Flash Museum. They are looking at all of the exhibits, and Barry is studying intently as Wally runs around fanboying. Barry sees clips of Jay Garrick explaining the experiment that gave him his powers, and interviews where Jay Garrick explains that he is not a metahuman and doesn't possess the metagene, so he isn't quite sure where his speed came from. We also see as Wally excitedly grabs a Jay Garrick Flash t-shirt from the gift shop, asking his aunt and uncle if he can get it. We cut to the CCPD lab, where we see Barry Allen sequencing his own DNA, confirming with his wife that he doesn't have the metagene, just like Jay Garrick didn't. And then we cut back to the CCPD lab, where we see Barry checking his chemicals against Jay Garrick's experiment, finding nothing in common. Back at the track, Barry now runs all the way to Cape Horn in Chile, and back. He can now run as fast as a bolt of lightning. We cut back to the house again, and we see Barry staying up late at night, laying in bed, reading Jay Garrick's biography, titled The Fastest Man Alive. And finally we cut back to the track, as Barry is preparing to run all the way around the world. Iris tells her husband that depending on how fast he is, they are never going to pay for travel ever again. Barry agrees to this, and then takes his mark, and goes. He runs all the way around the planet and returns to Iris in just about 30 seconds. Iris is floored, but Barry says that he feels like he can go faster, and so he does it again, but once again hits 30 seconds. Iris is still astounded by this consistency, but Barry says he can feel like there's more in the tank. So instead of running one lap, he asks Iris to time multiple laps, and Barry takes off. The first lap around the world takes 30 seconds. The second takes 25. The third, 20. The laps continue and grow faster and faster as Iris's eyes open wide, with the final lap coming in just under 9 seconds. Barry just ran 10 million miles per hour. Barry and Iris hug and jump for joy. And then we cut back to the house, with Iris sitting on their bed looking towards the bathroom door, which is closed. Iris is bouncing in excitement, and we hear Barry's voice from the other side of the door saying he feels silly. Iris tells him that bright costumes are mandatory for superheroes. And Barry responds, well, what about the Batman? Iris just rolls her eyes, saying vampires don't count, and she urges her husband to show her the costume. And so Barry opens the door, and Iris squeals in joy. And we see Barry Allen in the full Flash costume. The bright red suit, the yellow and white lightning bolt symbol on the chest, the golden wings on the side of the mask, and the bright gold boots. Barry clearly looks a little embarrassed and says, it's not too much? And Iris insists that it is perfect. Barry looks back into the mirror and says, are you sure people are going to get the reference to the Flash's helmet wings? And Iris says, yes, of course they will. You're overthinking this. Iris wraps her arms around Barry's neck and says, so, have you given the name a thought? And Barry says that he's leaning towards Impulse, but ironically, he doesn't want to act on an impulse choosing the name, and he feels that the right one will find him. Iris kisses her husband and tells him she knows that it will. And then with a playful slap on the butt, she tells him, go out there and make some good news for me to report. And Barry winks at her and runs away. Back with the Rogues, we see them planning multiple simultaneous bank heists. Mick asks Leonard if he's sure that they can hit this many at once, and Leonard just nods, holding up the hologram projectors, saying that if these work the way we want them to, we're going to have nothing to worry about. And the Rogues all head out. Back with Barry, he's trying to figure out where to start his new hero career as he runs around this city. At first, he just does some regular good deeds. He catches people as they fall, he gets some cats out of trees, but then he notices the local park. It is filthy. It is covered in garbage. And so, in a burst of red light, Barry Allen cleans up the entire park, to the joy of the children and parents nearby. And then he takes off again. We see that Barry is tuned into the CCPD radio frequency, and he's waiting on suitable calls to act on. We get a rapid montage of Barry stopping a few minor crimes, before seeing him stop on a rooftop and cheering to himself about how good this feels. And that is when he receives the call that there are 5 simultaneous bank robberies currently in progress. And Barry leaps into action. Barry runs to the closest of the banks and finds a team of men robbing it. But only one of the men reacts surprised at all when he announces his presence. We watch as this masked man pulls out a pair of boomerangs and hurls them at Barry. Barry is gobsmacked at the fact that this guy is robbing a bank with boomerangs? Barry dodges out of the way, and one of the boomerangs slices clean through a support beam behind him. A piece of ceiling comes crashing down to the ground towards a civilian, but Barry rushes them outside while avoiding Digger's attacks. He places the civilian down outside and runs right back into the fray. He punches at one of the other men who are loading cash into the truck and sends him flying into a wall. Barry is originally worried because he didn't think he put that much force behind the hit, but then the guy gets up completely unfazed and goes right back to trying to get the money out. Barry runs around trying to stop the other men, even tying them up, but is shocked as these other men all begin to phase through the rope he'd wrapped them in and continue robbing the bank. Barry looks around again for the boomerang man, since that is the only guy who seems human amongst all of them. He speeds towards the man, leaping through his boomerangs, and knocks the man out cold. Barry then rushes towards the truck, being loaded with cash, but his hand hits an invisible barrier as he reaches for the money. And then all of the men in the bank run together, fusing into one man. And they leap into the truck through the invisible barrier, and the truck takes off. Barry checks the bank to make sure the rest of the civilians are safe as he races after the truck. He is trying to stop it, but it seems to rebuff all of his attempts. And then the truck begins to fly. It takes off into the sky, and Barry is left standing in the middle of the street, absolutely confused. Barry runs to the bank and finds Digger regaining consciousness just as the CCPD show up. They draw their weapons and point them at Barry. Barry tries to proclaim his innocence, but the cops are hearing none of it. But the civilian that Barry had just saved from the collapsing ceiling urges the cops that the red dude is on their side. And with that distraction, Barry vanishes, leaving Digger tied up for the police to take into custody. Barry runs out to the other banks to investigate and overhears the same story. A team of identical men, one ringleader, and a truck that vanished in some fantastical way. And that's when Barry receives a call for him from his captain to come in and check these crime scenes. And so Barry rushes back to the first bank, changing into his regular clothes. Barry performs his analysis and finds nothing. No hair, no clothes fibers, no anything. That should be impossible. Barry asks his captain if he can sit in on the interrogation with the guy that they apprehended, and see if he overhears anything that could be useful. The captain agrees and then hands Barry the boomerangs that they got off of Digger, saying that Barry is the only one smart enough in the department to make any sense of them. And so, Barry heads back to the CCPD precinct to investigate. And he finds that these boomerangs are using sophisticated hologram technology powered by kryptonite. And so Barry heads to the detective in charge of the Star Labs case and asks them if they looked into the Evan McCullough tip that he gave them before he was hit by lightning. And the detective confirms that yes, Evan McCullough is a Scottish thief known for using holograms to replace stolen items. He calls himself the Mirror Master. Their current working theory is that he used some sort of holographic disguise to change himself into the employee they have on camera robbing the lab. And then Barry hands the detective the boomerangs and the kryptonite, explaining that these bank heists are connected. The detective pats Barry on the back and heads into the other detective who is currently interrogating Digger Harkness. Digger is being obstinate and refusing to talk, but the detective calls over the one interrogating him and whispers something into their ear. That detective returns to Digger with a smile and asks him, "So what do you know about Evan McCullough?" And Digger freezes, immediately saying that he wants his lawyer. And we cut back to the rogues, who are furious that one of their own got caught. Evan, Lisa, and Leonard are watching a hologram recreation of when Digger was caught, and they're all staring at the holographic recreation of Barry. Leonard says that it looks like they have a superhero on their hands, and Lisa says that whatever, this Flash Jr. is the least of their problems. The police have Digger, which means they are going to need to break him out. Evan asks Lisa what the plan is, and Lisa says, distraction. And we cut back to Barry. He returns home to find Wally fanboying hard over the new Flash, as Wally calls him. He has already made a blurry screen grab of footage of Barry in action, his new wallpaper. He says that the suit looks cool, but he personally would have gone with more yellow than red, but, it's not him. That is when Iris walks in and asks Barry all about his big day. Wally looks back confused at that comment before Barry says, "Oh yeah, all the bank robberies." Wally nods and then returns back to his video game. Iris leans into her husband and asks if he has any juicy tidbits he can say on record yet, and Barry says, "No, nothing on record, but here's everything I know." He explains everything to Iris, and Iris mentions that the MO seems really similar to that group that called themselves the Rogues a few years back. Barry asks who, and Iris says, "Look, do you remember those guys that got away because one of their guys threw boomerangs at the cop cars, popping their tires?" And Barry cannot believe he forgot about that. It was so weird. Iris asks if he thinks that these might be the same people, and Barry says it has to be. Iris excitedly says, "Look at you. Day one as a superhero, and you already have real bad guys to fight? Oh, we are going to have to come up with a name for you soon." The next day, we are back with the Rogues, and we see them sitting in a van outside of the Central City Museum of Fine Art. Everyone except Lisa. They are talking to her over a radio, asking if she is sure that this will work, and she assures them it will. They need to draw as many police and red-suited speedsters away from the precinct as possible. Now move. Leonard, Mick, and Mark head out of the van towards the museum. and Evan follows shortly after, wearing a fancy-looking cybernetic suit. We see that he is equipped with mobile projectors along his belt, and is now sporting a wrist computer that spans his entire forearm. He looks over to Mick Rory and asks him if he will do the honors. And Mick Rory pulls out a lighter, and his eyes go wild. We cut back to the West Allen household and find Barry eating dinner as he receives a notification that the museum has caught fire. Barry is out of the house in an instant, just before Wally comes out of his room. He calls for his uncle, but after receiving no response, he just shrugs and heads downstairs. Barry arrives on the scene where the firefighters are trying to fight the fire, but it won't go out. The water is literally bouncing off of the flames as it continues to spread. Barry asks them if there's anything he can do to help, and they say no, but the museum director gets his attention and grabs him, begging him to please save the art. And so, Barry Allen runs into the flames to save as much as he can. Only as soon as he steps inside, he finds that the museum is pristine. He dashes back outside and notes that the museum is completely on fire. It looks partially destroyed. But running back in, the museum is untouched, and Barry realizes that the fire is just an elaborate hologram. So Barry takes off, casing the entire museum, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Everything is in place, and the place seems entirely empty. But something catches his eye. A trippy-looking modern art mirror installation. But as he stares at the mirror, he notices someone sneaking up on him in the reflection. Barry waits and pretends that he can't see the person right before they try to hit him, and Barry whips around only to find nothing. And then the reflection from the mirror hits him. Barry turns back around and the mirror is gone, replaced by dozens and dozens of duplicates of Leonard Snart. And they all begin to swarm Barry. Barry dodges out of the way and bobs and weaves through the many duplicates as Leonard Snart says to him, "You know, it is a real honor fighting a superhero. Really feels like I've taken a step up in my crime career." And Barry says that while he's flattered, he's afraid to say that this man's crime career will be coming to an abrupt end soon enough. And Barry runs in a rapid circle, creating a miniature tornado, blowing many Leonards away. But the real Leonard is left standing still. Barry says, "Your hologram guys weigh less than normal. Now come on, big man. If you think you're so tough, give me your best shot." And we see something happen to Leonard, hearing those words again, from a superior adversary. Leonard snaps, and he begins swinging at Barry like a madman. Barry realizes that he has clearly triggered something deep and dark inside this man's subconscious, and Barry begins dodging this man's punches before swiftly sending Leonard flying back. But Leonard savagely rushes back at the Flash, and we see Evan watching this, and he radios Lisa saying, "Now." And they cut to Lisa. She is outside the CCPD precinct, and she steps out of her car, revealing a golden suit and her golden skates. And Lisa begins to dance. She rushes into the station, doing a twirl and slicing the doors in half as she goes. Police begin to charge at her, but she dances and weaves through the air as she goes, working her way back to Digger. She gets to his cell and with a glorious spin kick, slices a nearly perfect circle in his cell bars. She then pulls 2 brand new boomerangs out of a bag and tosses them to him. Digger takes them and powers on the blades, and he and Lisa have an awesome moment of back-to-back breaking out of the CCPD headquarters, highlighted by blue and gold lasers. Back with the Flash, the other rogues have leapt in, and Barry is bobbing and weaving between them. But now, they keep vanishing into thin air and popping back out just in time to hit him. Evan receives word back at the same time Barry overhears in the CCPD radio that Digger Harkness has escaped with the help of some golden gliding woman. Hearing that, all of the rogues begin to turn invisible. The last one to fade is Leonard, as he says, "This ain't over, big man." and in an instant the rogues are gone. The flames to the museum go out, and worst of all of the art disappears. The museum was cleaned out. Barry heads outside utterly defeated, and he apologizes to the museum director and promises to bring everything back, but the director just nods at Barry, clearly disappointed and not really believing him. Barry looks around and sees Iris appear on the scene, and with a single look between the two, she knows that Barry did not have a good day today. And Barry runs off. But who did have a good day today were the rogues. They all arrive back at the safe house as Evan's projector drones begin to appear and place all of the art in their warehouse. This is the biggest score they've ever gotten. Digger and Lisa roll in, and the rogues all begin to cheer and celebrate their amazing night. Everyone except Leonard. Lisa goes to ask her brother what's wrong, and he says that this just isn't doing it for him anymore, gesturing to all of the art and the money. They just fought someone with superpowers, and he's just itching for a rematch. Leonard hops onto the table and addresses the other rogues, saying, "Why do we do what we do? We don't need the money. We have more than we could ever spend from all the banks that we've robbed. We do this for reputation. We do this because we're the rogues." Digger, Mick, and Mark begin to cheer, and even Lisa and Evan look intrigued. Leonard looks over to Evan and says, "Lisa has her skates, Digger has his boomerangs, and you have your mirrors. What can you cook up for the rest of us?" And Evan's mind begins to race. Back with Barry, we see that he is just feeling dejected and sitting on the couch. And Wally asks him, "What's up, Uncle Barry?" And Barry explains that he just had a rough day at work. And Wally says he isn't the only one. "Did you see the news? New Flash got his butt kicked at the museum." And Barry says, "Do you think your new hero is super lame now?" But Wally just looks confused. He says, "Why would I think he's lame for losing? People lose sometimes, like big deal. And come on, this dude was fighting invisible guys and holograms. Cut him some slack, Uncle Barry." And Barry catches that, saying, "Well, how did you know he was fighting holograms?" And Wally just looks confused as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. He says, "The scan speed." And Barry just looks at Wally like, "What?" And Wally pulls out his phone. He says, "Look." And he shows Barry the news coverage showing the CCPD footage of the bank heist and the newly released museum footage. And Wally points at the people. "See?" And Barry just shakes his head no. Wally sighs and slows the video footage down to slow-mo, going frame by frame, until the image flickers. And Barry jolts up when he sees it. He says, "What is that?" And Wally says, he's like, "That's the scan speed that like a movie projector does when you slow it down. It's easy to notice on the footage because cameras are filming at a different frame rate than the projectors are projecting at." And Barry is just astounded that Wally managed to catch that. He asks his nephew, "How did you see that?" And Wally just shrugs, saying, "Oh, good eyes?" And Barry hugs his nephew and says, "You might have just cracked the case." And Wally says, "Ooh, cool. Do I get like a money reward or something if I did?" And Barry says that, you know what? He'll think of something. And Barry heads to the CCPD to go over the security footage from the banks of the museum. We see that Barry watches it at rapid speed, but if we look at his eyes, they're crackling with lightning. And we see that to Barry's perspective, he is watching it in super slow motion, and sure enough, he is very clearly seeing a flicker on all of the projected men. Barry begins scanning through all of the footage they have, every camera and every angle, and he finally sees what he wanted. The getaway van with its license plate uncovered, only for a fragment of a single frame of a single screen from a single camera. It would have taken any normal person hundreds, if not thousands of hours to cipher through all of that. Barry takes that license plate number and runs it through the CCPD traffic camera database to pull up any movement. And eventually he gets a ping. Barry says to himself, "Wally, you are so getting a new video game for this." and Barry rushes out to the outskirts of the city where that van was last seen, and he finds the rogue's warehouse. He cases the joint and then changes into his Flash outfit and runs inside announcing his presence. But the warehouse is empty. He runs all over the base, finding the lab where the kryptonite was shaved down into shards, finding all of the art from the art museum, finding piles of money, but finding none of the rogues. And while he's bummed about not being able to stop the criminals right now, he looks over to the pile of art and smiles. We cut back to the Central City Fine Art Museum, where we see the museum director having a sad meeting with an insurance representative going over the losses from the other day. But as they're talking, there is a whoosh of air, and they turn around and find one of the paintings has been returned. The director approaches it in disbelief, and then whoosh, another painting. Whoosh, another, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Streaks of red and crackling electricity dance around the museum halls as one by one all of the displays are returned to their rightful place. And finally, the director stops spinning and sees a note on a bench. And it simply reads, "I'm sorry it took so long. Signed, a friend." And we cut back to the rogues. They are driving in a car returning to the base, and they are talking about how the new gear that Evan made them is awesome, and they cannot wait to take it for a real run. But then they see the flashing red and blue lights as they turn a corner, and they freeze. They see dozens of CCPD squad cars right outside their warehouse, and they are all frozen in shock and outrage. All of their stuff has been seized by the police. Mark Martin then pulls out his phone and shows everyone an article that the Scarlet Speedster has returned the art to the museum. The rogues are furious. Digger tries to encourage everyone, saying, hey, we have other safe houses, but Evan points out that their laptops were in there. If the police can get into them, that is all of their safe houses, that is all of their offshore bank accounts, that is all of their information out there. They got cocky, and now they have nothing. But Leonard rallies the troops. He says, if this new Flash thinks that he can take us down easy without a fight, he has another thing coming. If he thinks that he's going to be this town's superhero, I say it's about time we become this town's super criminals. Lisa looks at her brother and asks him what he has in mind, and Leonard looks at Mark and tells him, head to Keystone. And back with Barry Allen, he is on cloud 9. The CCPD have everything they need to take the rogues down for good. Barry turned the art back into the art museum. This is a great day, and Iris is congratulating him on this monumentous occasion. And Barry hands Wally a new video game, saying that Wally's tip panned out. Wally is excited and goes to start it immediately, and Iris approaches Barry, saying that she is so proud of him, and he picks her up in a hug, saying that being a hero is almost as good as being married to her. Iris laughs and says, how close is it? And Barry says, well, that depends on how nice you are about me in your next report. Iris just laughs at this, but then Wally yells at them from upstairs. You guys? There's a giant man across the river. Barry and Iris look out their window towards the river that divides Keystone from Central City, and sure enough, floating above downtown Keystone City is a giant Evan McCullough. He is wearing a slimmed-down version of his suit from earlier, now with an orange and green color scheme. And Iris looks at her husband and nods. Barry fakes a beeper call from work and heads outside and rushes over to face the giant Mirror Master, which is hovering above the J. Garrick Flash Museum. Mirror Master is calling out for the new speedster in town to come and face them. That if you want to take down the rogues, you have to earn it. And Barry shows up to confront them, saying, you didn't have to go to all this trouble and make such a big show if you just wanted to turn yourselves in. Tell you what, I'll give you all one chance. This doesn't have to end in a fight. But the massive Mirror Master says, oh no, it does. and Barry is then shot from off-screen with a blast of burning, fiery energy. Barry's suit catches on fire, and as he tries to put it out, he's hit in the back by a beam of freezing blue energy. Barry keels over as ice begins to form around him, and stepping out of invisibility are Mick Rory, wearing a white and orange flame-retardant suit, and Leonard Snart, wearing a bright blue parka and protective goggles. He says, "How was that for my best shot?" Barry begins to vibrate out of the ice, but he's then struck by lightning as Mark Marden descends from the sky in a green and yellow jumpsuit, standing atop of a miniature tornado. Barry shatters out of the ice just in time to dodge two boomerangs coming his way, as Digger Harkness walks out wearing a big white scarf, a bandolier full of dozens of boomerangs, and a long blue coat. But as Barry leaps into the air to dodge out of the way of these boomerangs, he is kicked back down into the ground by a floating Lisa Snart, who now appears to have two golden ribbons around her arms. And finally, the massive hologram of Mirror Master shrinks back down to normal size and joins his friends in front of their mutual foe. Leonard speaks up, saying that Barry was a real eye-opener for them, because they realized that they really needed to step up their game. And he thanks him for that. Leonard blasts Barry again with his ice gun, beginning to freeze Barry solid, and he says, "Oh, don't worry about this. My sister ran the math, and this shouldn't kill you. That's not really our thing. But we thought that the Flash Museum could use a new statue." And Barry Allen is frozen solid right in front of the massive golden statue of Jay Garrick. And the rogues begin to cheer as onlookers see the bad guys have won. Mick Rory speaks up asking what they do now, and Lisa and Evan hold hands saying, "Whatever we want. We just took down the Little Red, and our weapons run on kryptonite, so Big Blue can't stop us either." The rogues turn to the people of Keystone City and shout out, "You hear that? We're running the show now. And there's nothing the Man of Steel or the fastest man alive can do to stop us." But as they're speaking, there's this buzzing sound that grows louder and louder. The rogues wonder what that is, and they turn just in time to see the block of ice that was Barry Allen shatter. And Barry stands there vibrating with lightning crackling off of his body. He smiles to the rogues and says, "Actually, I'd like to thank you all, because you made me realize that I need to step my game up too." Barry looks up to the statue of Jay Garrick, and then back to the rogues and says, "Round two," and Barry vanishes. The rogues instantly scatter in a panic, all on high alert, and then boom! Barry appears behind Mark Marden and knocks him to the ground. Mark barely manages to catch himself with a gust of wind before Barry is on top of him again. But Mick Rory fires a blast at Barry, and Barry manages to dodge to the right and turns his attentions towards Mick. Mick blasts Barry with an onslaught of fire, and Barry begins to spin rapidly, kicking the flames up into the air and dispersing the heat. Mick steps backwards trying to avoid this, but is also caught off guard by the beauty of the flaming tornado heading towards him. And boom! A rapid red fist bursts from the flames and knocks Mick to the ground unconscious. Seeing this, the rest of the rogues run for cover inside the Flash Museum. Barry ties up Mick and strips away his weapon, leaving him under the watchful eye of the Jay Garrick statue before running inside after the others. In the museum, Barry is greeted by the automated greeter just as a laser boomerang swings down and cuts it in half. Barry dodges out of the way and turns towards Digger Harkness. Digger is hurling his boomerangs at him, and Barry just keeps dodging and bobbing and weaving, but he realizes he shouldn't be. And Barry starts to stand still. Digger takes his opportunity and hurls even more boomerangs at Barry, and we see Barry speed up his perception. The boomerangs begin to move slower and slower, and Barry starts catching them, vibrating them into pieces with his super speed. Digger sees this and says, "Oh, hell. and he begins hurling everything he has at Barry, emptying his entire bandolier, before finally, he's all out. But Digger reaches into his back pocket and pulls out the batarang from earlier. He kisses it for good luck and hurls it at Barry, who catches it with ease, but takes a moment to stare at it and go, "Oh, cool, is this real?" To which Digger proudly says, "Yeah, it is." And Barry says, "Okay, I'll let you keep this one." And he rushes up, knocking Digger out cold. He rushes him back outside, placing him tied up next to Mick Rory, and we see that the batarang is tucked away safely on Digger's bandolier. Barry runs back inside to find Mark Martin waiting in ambush as he hurls another bolt of lightning at Barry from a device that appears to be some sort of magic wand. Mark is hovering in the air far out of Barry's reach as he fires bolt after bolt. Barry barely manages to dodge out of the way of the blasts, and as he is, he sees a display of Jay Garrick firing lightning from his arms. And so Barry decides to try it himself. He begins vibrating his hands at super speed as they begin to crackle with energy. He charges it up and fires a lightning blast at Mark Martin. It completely whizzes past him and hits the wall behind him, but Mark realizes that the playing field has just been leveled. And Barry and Mark begin playing essentially a game of lightning bolt dodgeball. And after only a few volleys, Mark is knocked off of his tornado and plummets to the ground, before being caught by Barry. Barry runs him outside and leaves him with the others, and now we see that the Keystone Police Department, as well as several news stations, have shown up, including Iris. Back inside, Barry runs past a display of Jay with the rest of the Justice Society during World War II, and just barely manages to limbo underneath a glowing, golden, razor-sharp ribbon. Lisa Snart skates over his head, flying through the air, and says that while Barry may be faster than her, she has the skies. And while she is dancing, she is swinging her glowing golden ribbons at him, and we see as one cuts clear through a mannequin of Hawkman. Barry runs out of the way, but quickly finds that he begins slipping and sliding on the floor, looking down, realizing that the floor has been frozen solid, and we see Leonard Snart blasting the floor with his ice beams. Barry begins a dangerous game of the floor is lava, dancing around the room, avoiding the blasts from the two siblings. He is dodging between the two, and eventually one blast from Leonard just barely misses Barry and comes dangerously close to hitting his sister. Lisa yells at her brother to watch where he's shooting, and Barry grins. Barry then begins teasing Leonard, calling him Big Man like before, and we see that Leonard is furious, and he keeps firing at Barry. Barry again dodging and weaving through the blasts until he manages to goad Leonard into firing at him as he is standing directly in front of Lisa. Barry dodges out of the way, and the ice beam hits Lisa square in the chest. She is knocked out of the sky, frozen, and begins plummeting towards the ground. Leonard drops his gun and runs for his sister, but he is too late. But Barry isn't, and Barry catches Lisa and hands her shivering body to her brother, before running them both outside. Leonard is tied up and left with the other rogues, and Barry hands Lisa to the police, saying to call the paramedics and have her treated for hypothermia as soon as they can. And Barry runs back into the museum to face Mirror Master. He walks around calling for Evan, but doesn't receive an answer. Until one of the mannequins begins to move. It's Jay Garrick. He steps off the pedestal down in front of Barry and says, "You think you can just walk in here and take my legacy? I have a museum dedicated to me, and you think you just get to ride my coattails to fame?" But Barry just yells out, "All right, McCullough, very nice trick, but these mind games aren't going to work. I already have imposter syndrome, so you puppeting the illusion of one of the world's greatest heroes isn't going to mess with me the way you want it to." And a voice from behind Barry says, well, it was worth a shot, and Evan appears swinging at Barry and vanishing again. Dozens of Evans appear and lunge at Barry, and Barry uses his array of abilities to push them back. But Evan is sending the full swarm after him. Barry dodges and weaves, but he remembers what Wally told him. and Barry speeds up his perception. Everything begins moving slower and slower until finally Barry can see the scan lines. He sees each individual beam of light fired by each hologram projector as they draw their holograms line by line. And what's more, he can see where what appears to be a wall is being drawn. Barry runs behind the illusion and sees through what Evan McCullough has been using to simulate invisibility. Barry stands directly behind Evan, and everything begins moving at normal speed again. Evan begins looking around confused as to where Barry went, and Barry taps Evan on the shoulder. Evan jumps back asking how, and Barry echoes Wally's words, "Scan lines," and he knocks out Mirror Master. Barry walks back outside with the Mirror Master in custody and finds a massive crowd waiting. Citizens of Central and Keystone City, the Keystone Police Department, and several news stations are all waiting to see him. Barry places Evan down with the rest of the rogues. We see Lisa sitting in an ambulance wrapped in a thermal blanket, and Barry waves to the crowd as they begin to cheer. He holds up a finger, just asking everyone for 1 minute, and he rushes back inside and fixes all of the damage to the museum that he can before coming back out. And the crowd goes wild. Barry waves to everyone, and Iris pushes through the crowd with her camera crew, saying, "Hello, I'm Iris West Allen with Picture News. So you're the new speedster that's been running around the Twin Cities recently." And Barry nods sheepishly. Iris says, "Some people have called you the Scarlet Speedster, others the Crimson Comet, and even more, the new Flash. And so I think everyone here wants to know, what do we call you?" And Barry just looks at everyone nervous and says, While I appreciate the comparison to the Flash, Jake Garrick was one of the greatest heroes the world has ever seen, and that is a lot to live up to. So I don't really know if that's the best name for me." "I do," shouts a voice from the crowd, and Barry looks over to see Judith Green, Jay Garrick's daughter. She is crying tears of joy as she says to him, "My father would have been honored if you wanted to take up his mantle. And if it means anything to you, you have my blessing." Another voice shouts out, "Yeah! Let's hear it for the new Flash!" And Barry whips around to see Wally West standing there. He's wearing the Flash shirt that he got from the museum gift shop, and he starts chanting, "Flash! Flash! Flash! Flash!" And the rest of the crowd join in, and Barry is surrounded by cheers. Barry walks over to Judith and takes her hand. He smiles at her, and she smiles at him, and she finally gets to reach out and touch his cheek like she wanted to when he saved her all those weeks ago. And she says, "Thank you, Flash." And Barry says to her, "You're welcome, Judith." And the crowd cheers. The rogues are loaded into an armored squad car, and as they all pile in, Barry looks to the crowd and utters Jay Garrick's famous catchphrase, "Back in a flash," and boom, Barry is gone and the crowd goes wild. And then we cut inside the squad car as it drives away. The rogues are furious, but Mick Rory speaks up, saying, "All right, I'll say it. That was the most fun I've ever had." And the other rogues begin to laugh at this. And Digger speaks up, saying, "Right, it was. Fighting a superhero like that at the museum dedicated to his predecessor? That's something right out of a comic book right there. Bloody cool it was." Even Lisa and Leonard begin to laugh, admitting that it really was fun. But Evan seems quiet. Lisa nudges her boyfriend and says, "Babe, don't be down. We went out on top. That's more than a lot of people in our line of work could ever ask for." But Evan just looks at everyone and says, "Who said we went out?" And Evan vanishes, revealing in his place a projector. It falls to the ground, and the rest of the rogues begin to cheer, realizing that their buddy is going to break them out of jail. And we cut outside the squad car, and we see the real Evan McCullough watching as his friends are taken away. He smiles and then vanishes into thin air. And that is the Flash in my DC Cinematic Universe.